Nonsense rhyme. Now, this may sound that there must be lack of sense, but this is not the case. According to T.S. Eliot, in nonsense rhyme, there is no vacuity of sense, but there is parody of sense, and there is sense in it. So, these kind of rhymes talk about the arbitrariness of language, and though they come under the macrocosm of children's literature, when judged from socio-political context, they can produce greater meanings that makes them a cult of their own. So Edward Lear, Lewis Carroll, they are the pioneers of this kind of literature, nonsense rhyme. But in Bengal or in India, Sukumar Roy was the first one really to take this kind of literature, this nonsense rhyme to another level. His two books, Abol tabol, which in English means rhymes without reason, and Hojo Borola, translated as Topsy-Turvy Tale, are the two greatest pieces of this kind of literature. Now, nonsense rhyme is different, obviously, from fantasy, which is actually governed by the logic of magic and marvel. In nonsense rhyme, the way of presentation of things is different. There is no lack of sense, lack of rationality, but it is present in a completely different way. That's why they are called nonsense rhyme. Now, Sukumar Roy, he was born in a very cultural family. His father was Upendra Kishore Roy. He was born in 1887. His father was a famous illustrator, printer. He was a mix of East and West. And Sukumar Roy was obviously brought up in that kind of ambience. So during his student life, with some of his friends, he formed a nonsense club that produced two plays. One is Cacophony, or in Bengali Jhalapala, and the other is Lakshman and his Wonder Weapon. Originally in Bengali was Lokmaner Shokti Cell, and they also produced or issued a magazine, Share Bottrish Bhaja, translated as savory dish. In 1913, after coming back from England, after completing advanced course in printing, Sukumar Roy came back to India and joined his father in submitting writings for the magazine called Sandesh, children's magazine. Uh, Editor was his father, Upendra Kishore Roy, but then Sukumar Roy started producing his rhymes or his poems and other illustrations for this magazine. In 1914, the first Abol Tabol rhyme, or the rhymes without reason, the first one, Khichuri, originally called Khichuri, in English Hodgepodge, was published, which talks about the mixture of different kind of animals, and the naming of them also was unique, like stork and tortoise together tortoise, lion and antelope together lion-telope, whale and elephant together whale-fan, and he also illustrated them so that the children or any reader can understand them well. So the characters or the nursery rhymes that he used to write and the characters portrayed in them, uh, maybe it can be the pumpkin puff, kumro potash, or the blighty cow, dash guru, or the super beast, they bear close affinity with Lewis Carroll's Jabberwocky or Lear's Blue Boss Boss. but they are far more domesticated. They are quite close to us, Sukumar Roy's characters. And Sukumar Roy was obviously brought up in colonial Bengal. So, in these rhymes, he actually satirized the Bengali Babus or the then Bengali intelligentsia who are filled with a sense of pride or kind of false pride for having acquired some manners of British and British education, which was propagated by Macaulay, through his educational policy. So these new Bengali Babus or the dandies, they were actually criticized by Sukumar Roy in his rhymes. The first rhyme that should be talked about is Kimbut, which is in English super beast. Now this creature craves for different parts of different animals. Like it wants voice like kaku, hopping leg like kangaroo, and trunk like elephant, and ultimately he gets all these things. Then he starts suffering from a kind of identity crisis. He could not figure out what can he be. So this was actually the condition of the then Bengalis. They did not know what they are actually. They start disliking the typical native culture, the native way of talking, mannerism, and they started liking the British culture, but they cannot fully get on with it. So there is a strange mixture. This kind of identity crisis they also started feeling. And so was the poem Blighty Cow. In that poem, the cow, Blighty cow. Now, the word blighty is derived from Bilaiti, means foreign. So, the cow does not eat anything native, it wants to eat which appears strange to the native people. So, the owner wants to sell it. So this is another example of how the Bengali people, Bengali Babus, the intelligentsia, feel in that society. And then there is lag-headed loon, which is in Bengali Hukomuko Hangla. Now, in this poem, there is a criticism of rationality, of using common sense. Now, this lark-headed loon is quite worried because he cannot swat flies that sits on the center of his back because he has two tails that move in a particular direction. So he cannot move that fly. So this is the blind adherence to set of rules and not using your common sense that is criticized there. And so is in the poem Encyclopedia, which is in Bengali means Ki Muskil. It is translated as encyclopedia. In that poem, a person is searching a way to avoid a charging bull. Now, in that book, there is ways written of everything, solution of every problem. So he is just searching that book to find a way to avoid a charging bull. Now, this is a lack of common sense. In each and everything, you should not follow the set of rules laid down in books. You should use your common sense. But that what happened to those educated Bengalis at the time, some of them, at the times, uh, they put a slavish adherence to the set of rules and education that was given in those institutions at that time. So they don't even use their own common sense. And in another poem, the Parliament Mustache, or in Bengali Gopchuri, the clerk, he actually quarrels or argues with his lesser clerk, who tried to reason with him that the stealing of the mustache under his nose is quite impossible. But he thinks that they have, one of them, or probably some of them, had done the wrong. So he tried to dominate them. And dominate them for what? Because he has a government job, he has a close affinity with the British, so he feels a sense of superiority to others. Now then there is another poem, the Griffon's Rouse, or in Bengali Ram Gorure Chana. Now he is always grave, he is always depressed, he is completely detached from society, he cannot love, he does not want to love. So he is always seems morbid and always detached from society. And the other poem, the Pumpkin Puff or Kumropotas. Now this is the pot-bellied lethargic figure, and people do strange things to see him dance or run. So actually the town people are awestruck to see the Bengali clerks who has that round belly, and they were awestruck by their affinity with the British people. So whatever they do, they can create a kind of havoc in the minds of the people because of their affinity towards the British intelligentsia or the British educationists and British employers. And the last one of them that is very important is a poem called in Bengali Bapuram Sapure, or The Snakes Alive. Now in that poem, the narrator tells Bapuram, the snake charmer, to give him two absolutely harmless snakes so that he can beat them with a cudgel. Now, this is the hegemonic domination using a kind of violence by the colonizers to exert their authority on the colonized people, the subalterns. So the nonsense rhymes, they are full of meanings. They are the sardonic criticism of the colonial Bengal, of the colonizers as well as the colonized people who did not have that political consciousness. So the poems, on the one hand, offer great joy to the children, but at the same time, they reveal the exploitation of the colonizers as well as the blind adherence of some of the colonized people towards them, and calls for the political consciousness that was quite missing at that time. But Sukumar Roy was actually not sure of how the readers would react. So, in fact, he wrote an apologia in the preface of the book, as Rabindranath Tagore also did for his nonsense book called S.Charit. So, he was not completely sure how his readers should take it, and it's a tragic thing that Sukumar Roy could not see his writings in book form in his lifetime. The Abol Rhymes Without Reason was published 9 days after his death, and so he could not see them during his lifetime as a book form. But from his sickbed, he used to send illustrations, set the designs, and the last poem of the Abol Rhymes Without Reason, was a dream song. That poem talks about death in a trance-like manner. So it was the greatness of Sukumar Roy that can be found in the poems of Rhymes Without Reason as well as in the topsy-turvy tale called Hojo Borola.